Okay, let's talk about one of the most controversial agreements on the planet, the massive trade deal between the European Union and South America's Mercosur bloc. And trust me, what's really driving it might not be what you think. So, here's the big question we're going to tackle. What if this massive trade deal, with all the arguments about economics, isn't really about trade at all? What if it's really about something much bigger, like power, new alliances, and frankly, just surviving in a world that's changing incredibly fast? Okay, so to really get what's at stake here, you gotta understand the sheer scale of this thing. I mean, this wasn't some quick deal. We're talking about an epic journey, a negotiation that's been going on for a quarter of a century. And just look at the numbers for a second. This thing would create the biggest free trade zone in history. We're talking about a market of 780 million people. That's just huge. It's really hard to overstate how massive that is. And believe me, this has been a marathon, not a sprint. The whole process started way back in 1999. It took 2 full decades just to get an agreement in principle. And today, well, it's totally stalled. So the real question is, why now? After 25 years of being stuck, why is there this sudden, almost desperate push to finally get this thing over the line? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The world itself has completely changed. The ground has shifted under everyone's feet. And a deal that used to just seem like a good idea now feels absolutely critical. And it's all because of 3 huge global pressures. All right, first up, the United States. For decades, right, the world could pretty much count on the US to be a stable anchor. But let's be honest, that's not really a given anymore. Its foreign policy has become a lot more unpredictable. And that's making traditional allies, both in Europe and Latin America, feel, well, a little exposed. Okay, so at the exact same time, you've got the rise of China. Its economic power is just completely reshaping global trade, and that's creating some really intense competition. I mean, for the Mercosur countries, Beijing is already their #1 trading partner, and China's influence is growing like wildfire in Europe too. And then, of course, there's Russia. The war in Ukraine isn't just a military threat right on Europe's doorstep. It has sent these massive shockwaves of instability across the entire globe. It's messed with everything from energy supplies to food security. And it's really highlighted just how dangerous it is to rely on partners who are, let's just say, volatile. So you can start to see the logic, right? You're facing an unpredictable ally, a super powerful competitor, and an aggressive adversary. It just makes sense that old partners like the EU and Mercosur are starting to realize, hey, maybe we need to find some solid ground together. And this is really the core idea here. The whole deal is being reframed. It's not just about economics anymore. Nope, it's now being pitched as a strategic partnership. You can almost think of it as a new geopolitical game plan for a really unstable world. And the goals? They go way beyond just lowering tariffs on goods. This is about building a real strategic team. It's about diversifying your partnerships so you're not totally dependent on 1 or 2 big players. It's about making sure you have access to the critical raw materials you need for the green energy transition. It's about working together on global governance, cooperating on security and technology, and, this is a big one, strengthening a shared commitment to democracy. And, to make all this actually work, the deal sets up a pretty clear structure. So at the very top, you've got a joint council of ministers. They're the ones making the big political decisions. Underneath them, a joint committee handles all the day-to-day stuff. And this part's really important. It also creates spaces for parliaments and civil society, groups like NGOs and unions, to actually have a voice in the process. The whole thing is designed to be a living, breathing partnership. But here's the thing. Despite this really grand geopolitical vision, the public debate always seems to get stuck on one simple and, as we're about to see, super misleading phrase. It's a phrase that's built this powerful but just completely flawed story around the deal. I'm sure you've heard it. Cows for cars. The story goes something like this. South America floods Europe with cheap beef, which threatens local farmers, and in exchange, they get to buy European cars. It's catchy, right? It's a powerful image. But is it actually true? Yeah, not even close. The reality tells a completely different story. If you look at the actual numbers, almost 60% of what the EU would import is manufactured goods. Another 25% is services. And agriculture, the thing that causes all the controversy, it's only about 15% of the whole pie. And we can drill down even deeper. That entire livestock sector, the cows and the cows for cars slogan, it would make up less than 4% of total EU imports. I mean, that's a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall picture. And you know what? The same kind of myth applies to the environmental debate, too. The big fear is always about deforestation to make room for more cattle. But again, when you look at the data, it shows something else entirely. So where would the new CO2 emissions actually come from? Well, over half would come from services, like transport and electricity. About a third would come from just private consumption. And agriculture's share of the new emissions, once again, just a tiny 4%. Okay, so if the geopolitical logic is so strong, and the biggest economic criticisms seem pretty overblown, why is this deal still stuck? Well, it's because the path forward is blocked by some very real and very powerful hurdles. On one side, you have these powerful protectionist lobbies, especially in the agriculture sector. You also have some really legitimate environmental concerns that, frankly, still need to be properly addressed. But maybe the biggest challenge of all is just internal division. In Europe, you have countries like France that are still really, really skeptical. And then within Mercosur itself, the political polarization is so intense that just getting all the member countries on the same page is a constant struggle. And all of that leaves us with this one final critical question. In a world that is this unstable, this uncertain, is it better to stick together and sign a good enough deal today? Or is it better to hold out for a perfect deal that, well, might never actually happen? It's a huge strategic choice, and whatever they decide, the consequences are going to echo for decades.